This is a test. This station is conducting a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test.
Everyone, this is Thunderpud number 2, and I'm proud to present the inaugural episode of The Good News with the Reverend Doctor. So I'm going to turn it over now to your host, Agent C.
Thank you, and welcome to The Good News with the Reverend Doctor. Reverend Doctor, please introduce yourself. I'm Agent C. Please tell us all about yourself.
As previously seen on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. For any new viewers who aren't familiar with you or your background.
Well, let's see. I'm a Pisces. I like long walks on the beach, candlelit dinner.
Very nice.
Are you single?
Yeah.
Let's see. Conspiracy and history. Basically, you name it. It's my pet topic, pet interest.
Right. And we'll be discussing a lot of that through this podcast, as far as, different conspiracies. And we've talked about this before. You're not, and I don't like the word myself, a conspiracy theorist as much as a conspiracy
realist.
Exactly. So we're going to go ahead and we've got a couple of topics on this show. But we got some news last night.
Yes, we did.
And I want to start off with that because it'll definitely lead into what the first topic is on this podcast. That was last night. We found out the death of George H.W. Bush. I know you're a fan. I was a fan.
Oh, he was one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah, you're a fan.
Huge Bush
fan. No, and also
the Iraqi people fans.
I'm sure they love him too.
I personally was not a fan of this man. What are your thoughts on the big George?
It's interesting because I hold the belief that H.W. was likely the last president we had who had full CIA disclosure.
Right.
Now maybe Clinton, maybe with a big maybe thrown in there, but we had talked about on the last show that there's a lot of classified material that's top secret that through Patriot Act style laws being passed that gives lack of oversight to the CIA and groups like that, it's really not even necessary for most presidents to know anymore.
Right.
But, H.W. was head of the CIA back in the day during Kennedy.
Yes.
And, when you get to talking about a lot of this stuff like JFK, like Roswell, so on, I think that H.W., like I said, he was the last president that had total full disclosure on a lot of it.
Oh, he was privy to a lot
right.
of information, internally, externally, and stuff that nobody maybe will ever know.
Right.
What do you think he went to his grave with? As far as not, as far as non-common knowledge stuff.
Man, you're hitting straight out with the heavy questions.
Yeah. See, I imagine he took a lot with him.
Sure.
Well, with him being head of the CIA back during the time of Kennedy, there's a core idea that you see with a lot of people who this is a big topic of theirs, which is that the Kennedy assassination wasn't just as simple as it looks on the surface. Even if you dive into the idea that there's government involvement with it, there's a thread you see that this was a coup.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like how you'll see a lot of people who have the idea, which I mean, I don't really disagree with, that could Kennedy have been the last freely elected president, and that after this was when whatever pop culture term you want to use, Illuminati, globalists, whatever, that was the takeover after that.
Okay.
Because that was actually going to be my question: who was the coup by? So it would be these elite, shadowy type figures, like you refer to as the Illuminati.
Right.
It would actually, which
or there's another term that's used by the author Peter Levenda, who just refers to them as sinister forces.
Right.
Where it's not something you can easily define, but there's all these groups that lurk in the background beneath what the public sees, and a lot of times motivations will line up, usually for different reasons, and we'll see things of this nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good lead into our first topic is JFK. Obviously, there's a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of mystery, a lot of conspiracy around his term and his death, and even after, many decades after. And with Bush passing, what do you think he took with him, as far as everything that he may have known about this?
Well, sort of an indirect way I can answer that is, was it a year ago or less than that when Trump began really harping on the idea that he was going to declassify a lot of the missing JFK stuff?
Yeah, that's right. That's about a year or so ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I hold the opinion that there's nothing that's going to come out except people who are hardcore fetishists of learning what Oswald ate for breakfast, things like that. I mean, a lot of this I can imagine was at a conversation level, never written down. And no matter what happens, I don't think we're ever going to see a declassification the way we want to see one.
Right.
If when Trump talked about that, if there was anybody out there who was thinking that, the next day the CIA was going to get up on the podium and and go, "Hey guys,
okay, here it is.
Here
it is, guys. We've been holding this back.
Don't take it, man.
Look, we kind of got to come full circle with this.
We trust the public.
The Donald strong-armed us into this whole thing. We'll get okay. Here we go.
Hey,
we're crying uncle right now.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Johnson's Vietnam policy looked a little better. Kennedy wanted to disband us.
So we took him out,
Yeah.
And we've done that a couple times throughout history with different presidents.
Yeah.
It really wouldn't surprise me if George Bush was buried with the actual magic bullet itself. I mean, I'm talking like there's probably a real magic bullet,
There you go.
Okay. Well, since we're on that, the reasons why would it happen? Especially, with the CIA, and explain more as far as what would be their reasoning, what would be their motivation to do such.
Well, Kennedy himself was anti-CIA.
Yes.
He had the idea that there's a comic or a meme that I don't know if anybody, if either of you two guys saw it, but it's this picture from the 1940s or 50s, and it's got the president out walking a dog on the front lawn, and the dog's supposed to be the CIA.
Right.
And, it's this small, little ass Yorkie or something. And then it goes fast forward 60, 70 years or however long, and the dog's the size of a damn elephant.
You're right.
Right.
And
it's still on a leash, quote unquote leash.
Yeah, there's so many. The Patriot Act is sort of it's not exactly relevant to this one, but it's an example of how things like that work, where they'll, how would I say this? this is one you can edit out for airtime, but
Oh, no editing here, brother.
Yeah.
We're live, man.
no,
Live-ish.
there will be a number of laws that'll get passed, and it'll be packaged in this idea of you'll have some sort of external threat, like whether it's terrorism, whether it's communism, something of that nature, and the CIA or the alphabet boys, intelligence bodies, they'll say, we need to be able to do our thing without any involvement from the other branches. Right? So you pass enough of those package deals over the years, you arrive at a place where the CIA and, like I said, the alphabet boys are a fourth branch of government with no one to answer to.
Right, man. Unchecked.
They're a
Right,
parallel
right.
government.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically, the agencies outgrew the leadership.
Right.
Right.
And Reverend, I've heard theories, over the years that the FBI and the CIA actually have like an internal rivalry and an internal fight. Do you think there's any truth to that? I mean, I would assume so, man. It seems like even in
Are you talking about like a feud between the FBI and CIA?
yes, sir.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, me too, man.
Well, I'm
'cause,
sure there's at least a little bit of pissing contest between the two agencies. I mean,
well, hell, man, I've worked in places with first, second, and third shifts, and we have pissing contests between shifts. So I'm sure,
yeah.
when you get
they
to high
did,
levels
of
of
course.
government,
Yeah, they're not doing their job,
Exactly. And I just wonder though what that has to do with the overall security of the nation, man. That's where I start getting a little, man. If we had pissing contests at the job, maybe the furniture wasn't built correctly or something, But if these guys have falling outs or major feuds, I mean, it could really,
And of course, you've got agencies that hold back information from other agencies.
Well, I mean, look at how it is with county and state police.
Right.
Hey, brother, great example.
I mean, if you have a crime scene, they're gonna have a pissing contest over who gets it.
Right, man, right,
Yeah.
and that's just local.
Yeah.
And I think
And
FBI,
they'll-
CIA, it's gonna be that inflated.
Oh, for
Exponentially.
Sure.
a
Yeah.
1,000 times.
Right.
Man, right. With a lot worse consequences that could come from that. you
Yeah.
know. Which I wonder if JFK, could factor into that. Maybe if it was a CIA. Well, I guess we've already kind of talked about that being a coup. I mean, I guess that's
Right.
exactly what it
Yeah.
would be. Really.
Our position in the government is endangered, so we're gonna act accordingly.
Accordingly. Right.
Now, I know a lot of people have talked about this, and a lot of people still stand behind Lee Harvey Oswald as the guy, the motivation, just the
Soul.
the sole perpetrator of this.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a point I can bounce off of that, which is that I can remember 3-4 years ago talking with my grandmother, and there was some story about the Kennedy assassination, like a retrospective they were showing on TV, and I just casually asked her. I said, "Do you believe Oswald acted alone?" She said, "Yeah, of course." And that blew my mind
Right.
to think about. But
Right.
I guess that generation.
Well, I think that generation, Rev, they came up believing what the news told them. They had no reason not to trust them.
Right.
I mean, you only had three. We were just talking about that a little earlier before we started recording. You only had 3 or 4 channels. You only had 3 major broadcasters. So when you saw Walter Cronkite or any of these other old school broadcasters, well, man, you just trusted what they said.
Yeah.
And
you
everybody,
didn't question it.
yeah, and
And nobody had ever seen anything like
Exactly,
this before. I mean, it
right.
was just it going down, with the Kennedy assassination, then the assassination of Oswald, just bam, bam,
Back
right,
to back.
back to back. It's just
By a
like,
man with cancer,
whoa,
with
okay.
terminal cancer, who was
Right.
going to be dead within a couple of months. I mean,
right,
Yeah.
we were talking about this outside, but there's a study that was done that talks about how back in the day, well, to even go further than that back probably around the mid to late 90s, when the internet and TV was moving into the 1000s blocks of
Yeah.
channels, you had the 24-hour news cycle coming up, that there was this idea that we were going to enter a paradigm in American culture where everybody was going to become more knowledgeable, people were going to be more well informed, everybody was going to have a voice they can contribute, and society would become more open, or
Right.
whatever, I guess. So the results that they found over the years have been really fascinating, which is that during the 1950s or 60s, like he was just talking about how you would only have 10 channels, if that.
If that much, right?
Well, because of programming blocks, everybody had essentially the same base political knowledge as each other. You know, everybody subscribed to the same newspaper.
Right.
Everybody watched the news at the same time and whatever their programming was. And everybody watched Bonanza and the Flintstones, and it's a lot of time block. Well, what the internet and what cable's done is we've created one group of people who shuns news and politics entirely and retreats into watching nothing but Bonanza or the Flintstones.
Right.
And then we have one class of people who, you know, dives all in on the 24-hour news cycle, but they're not really getting more informed. They're becoming more opinionated.
Right.
So we have one class
Yes.
of extremely opinionated people and one class of extremely politically ignorant people.
Right.
And I think what the Reverend said, not to interrupt
Yeah,
you,
no, yeah.
but I think what you said, Reverend, is just so important, man. It's not that they're informed, they're opinionated.
Yeah.
And you know, if you already go into a situation thinking something already, and then you get, you know, your news channel to reinforce that, well, hell,
Repetitively.
Man, I'm sorry.
Repetitively.
Yes, sir.
Repetitively.
And then you throw the internet, social media on top of that.
Yeah.
Well, hell, man. I mean, you're just taking some. You know, you're taking a reinforcement of your ideas from somebody on TV, so they must know what they're talking about if they're
Yeah.
on television. And now you get to bounce it off all your other friends on your social media. Well, hell, man, that's just going to take your opinions and just make them solidify.
Well, what was
Yeah,
the
you know.
example we used outside that? The easiest way I could compare CNN or MSNBC is if I drove to a local college campus and I singled out the most liberal professor I could find, and I said, "So what's going on? You know, what's going on with the world today in the news?" And he's likely going to tell me, "Well, there's all these gender issues going on," and cycle it from there.
We have a Nazi in the White House.
Right.
You know, yeah.
And similarly, Fox News would be if I drove to the local dive bar and pulled up to the counter and asked, you know, one of 5 or 6 dudes sitting there and goes, "Man, what's going on with the news?" I'm going to hear something like,
We're getting
What-
invaded by Mexico.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
man, you know, you could throw any catchphrases together of topics. You could go like, "Man, I heard Bernie Sanders is part of the Muslim Brotherhood."
Right.
And believe
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
believe it.
Yeah.
Just like the liberal college professor's
Right.
going to believe that
Yeah.
there's a Nazi in the White House.
Right.
Right.
So, I mean,
Yep.
and,
Yep.
and I know me and the Reverend talking outside, and man, and I know this show is actually on JFK. I know we're kind of going off into a different little area right here, but you know, in my opinion, man, that's something that's really, you know, fundamentally wrong with our society right now, man. It's like we're playing sports with our politics.
Oh, for
you know, it's
sure.
no longer
Yeah.
about, well, we can find middle ground. You know,
Well,
now
it's our team.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's our team.
It's Redskins versus Cowboys.
Yeah.
I don't care how I score that fucking point as long as I score that point.
Yeah.
And man, that to me that's dangerous, you know. And,
Oh, yeah.
You know, because I know the three of us can sit and talk. We're all fairly centered, reasonable people. You know, well, you know, y'all are.
Well, yeah.
You know, I'm just a thunderpud.
Yeah.
But seriously, it's hard to find people that are centered and kind of can look
Oh,
at
for
both
sure.
sides and,
Yeah.
you know, and
Either right or left.
or left. And if you ask either one of those other sides about the other side, then they're evil.
Yep.
You know, there's no saving them, and they must be stopped. And man,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
just ridiculous. But anyway, that's my little bit of a
No,
soapbox.
no, you're absolutely right.
Are you a Marxist soy boy cuck, or are you a
Yeah.
or are you a privileged neo-Nazi?
Serious, that's it, man. And I mean, and I hate to tell people out there, there's a lot in between, brothers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of others out there, you know. But
Yeah.
Well, anyway, yeah, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Hell, I ain't even supposed to be talking, man. I'm just a producer, shit.
Well, you know, there are so many different other conspiracies, you know, thoughts about, you know, what actually happened. Do you want to share any of those as far as, you know?
Well, I'm going to open it up by posing a question to both of you.
Okay.
Do you believe in the idea of symbolism within the assassination?
Wow. Okay.
Here's what I
Hit
mean
me
by
hard. There you go.
Here's what I mean by that. You know how you have the phrase "the devil's in the details,"
Yes.
or
Yeah.
well, there's the idea, and this is an entire genre of Kennedy assassination lore, but it talks about how because this was carried out by Masons, by Bonesmen, by people whose default way of thinking is ritualistically, that you can find ritual symbolism within it.
Right.
This is something I've been fascinated in and interested in for decades. I think we talked about it on the podcast. Well, I guess I just gave up my secret identity, huh? But I know we had talked about it on the podcast. Sorry, but like I said,
podcast. What's podcast?
Yeah, really. Well, I hope y'all are listening to it. We're going to get a commercial at some point. But I know we've talked about this kind of stuff, like with the Masons and things like that, and something that I've looked into for years, like with Alan Hanneman and William Cooper. That was my original point, kind of going back to where I first heard this stuff. I think it's absolutely possible. I don't want to sit here and say absolute, because I don't know that. Do I think it's possible? Hell yeah, man, I think it's possible. And I think if there are groups like this, they would absolutely use symbolism, because apparently if these theories are correct, or even if there's a hint of truth to it, then these societies would go back for centuries.
Right.
Which we all know, man, that, cultures from back in those days relied heavily on symbolism.
Yes.
For pretty much everything. So I don't think that it's out of the question to think that these groups would use that, man. Absolutely. I think it's very highly possible.
Well, here's a few examples I can just throw at you and bounce off. But, the idea that this took place in Dallas. Dallas is on the 33rd parallel.
Yes, sir. I've heard that.
And, the 33rd degree is the highest degree of masonry.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Or, the fact that... I'll dive... No, you know what? I'll hold off on this one and dive into it in a minute. But the idea that, let's see.
Well, wasn't there something to do with like a pentagram too? Wasn't there something like the roads formed a pentagram? No, I'm thinking about Washington D.C. I'm sorry, man. I'm getting my.
Yeah, this stuff's kind of all over the place. And
the son of Sam too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. One of the lines of thinking you see open up is where people ask, well, what's the harm now? And if they chose to declassify it. And there's three reasons that you see popped up really over and over again. And one of them is because if the public really looks at it and knows what to look for and sees the fingerprints of masonry all over this, that one of the things it's going to damage is, not just masonry itself, but the entire idea of progressivism that we base this nation on.
Right.
From back all the way to its founding, liberty, equality, fraternity, all that.
Right.
Speaks ill of those who shielded the conspirators.
Right, man. I mean, it would destroy the trust in the government too. I mean, man,
yeah.
The government took out the president.
That's what I was going to say was the third point, was the entire mental concept that the public has that passes for knowledge about the genuine nature of what the United States government is.
Right, man. It goes against that. I mean, government of the people, by the people. Well, the people wouldn't assassinate a president, man.
Right.
I mean, I can definitely see that.
But do you also think that maybe that some of that has really been lost over the, at least 10 years or so?
Especially
after 9/11, we had the gathering, as I called it. As far as everybody coming together for America.
All American flags were everywhere.
Exactly.
Right.
But even after that, going into the war, everybody's patriotism kind of
starts fading a little bit
on the downslope, and
but
they weren't
it felt
really.
Like 9/11 was kind of a blip on the map, if that makes sense. That after the Cold War ended, the 90s were a period of total prosperity where people became really apolitical, I guess. Patriotism wasn't something you really saw or heard about. Everybody was taking advantage of the economy, really doing their own thing.
Right.
But then when 9/11 happened, it was like this little 6-month blip where everybody wore flag pins, got all into it. And that's sort of what I come to, was that just kind of an outlier.
And I think too, man, once the conspiracy theories about 9/11 started coming up, is really when you started seeing that shit. In my opinion, from what I could tell, is when you really started kind of seeing that shift away from that, blind patriotism.
Right.
And obviously, Bush going on TV and saying, "Well, now I'm going into Iraqi now," but I just remember when Bush went on TV and says, "Well, I guess they didn't have weapons of mass destruction." After all, starts laughing. I'm like, well, I hope every family member of soldiers on both sides of that war that died hear you laughing, man. I mean, once again, man, I get on my soapbox.
No.
I think that's really when the trust in the government really started getting, because we heard about JFK theories for years, man. In fact, it's probably the most at least the most popular conspiracy theory, I would think.
Right.
And I think, the trust was already kind of maybe getting questionable. But I think after 9/11, and especially when, Bush went into Iraq, that's when I really think that people are like, okay, maybe there is a little bit more going on here. Maybe we're not golden here. You know what I'm saying? Maybe we are capable of terrible things.
Well, what what I was talking about before about the 33rd parallel. There's a pretty large amount of things you can look into where the number 33 plays into this over and over again. Like, for example, it was said that Solomon's temple would be rebuilt on the 33rd parallel.
Okay.
Or that the first atomic bomb test we had in White Sands, New Mexico, 33rd parallel.
Really?
Right.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Yeah.
And Dealey Plaza in Dallas, site of the Dallas Masonic Temple.
So hell, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The one that I took a pause from a minute ago to sort of collect my thoughts was as to how to bring this up or where to frame it. We can kind of dive into it, but you talked about Oswald earlier. If you were to, what do you think Oswald's actual role in it was, if any?
Okay. As far as what I believe, what I think,
Right.
I think, and I know the word's overused, definitely. Definitely a scapegoat patsy.
Right.
As far as this is the guy that we can link all this stuff to is an easy out.
Kind of put a little bow on it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Agent. Do you think that Oswald was involved at all? Or do you think he was just a straight-up patsy? Or do you think he had any involvement?
I think he had some involvement.
Yeah, I do too.
But to take and put the farm in, bet the farm on this this one guy to get the job done.
Eggs in the basket, brother.
I don't think that's the case.
Right.
I honestly do not think that's the case. I think there was a backup, or what I say a backup. As far as I know, he was an excellent
shot marksman. Or what?
Marksman.
Yeah.
But that's a lot to put your whole
Do you believe the
whole
idea that he was
farm
one
on.
of three involved?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Yes.
think so too.
I don't know, 2 or 3.
Definitely more than one.
Right.
Well,
for sure more than one.
Three is the number, and one of the things that you should sort of look for in this stuff, how I was talking about the fingerprints having, they just reek of symbolism when you really look down at it, but there's an idea or a pattern you see pop up with a lot of assassinations where the Rosicrucian cross pattern is used. For anybody who's not familiar with what that looks like, the Exxon logo, how it looks like you have 2 X's, but you don't.
Right.
That's a Rosicrucian cross.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that when I was younger. They said it was like, I always heard it was a satanic symbol. Well, maybe I shouldn't say Rosicrucian. That's not correct, but I always heard it was a satanic symbol, like a broken fallen cross or something like that.
Well, it links back. It links back to the Knights Templar, and it's the Rosicrucian cross, but the actual term for it is the Cross of Lorraine.
Right.
And the way you would see it go is imagine you have a scenario like you had in Dallas that day with the parade. Well, you're going to have one shooter who's straight ahead,
right,
one who's to the left, and one who's to the right, slightly further up.
That's what when I said pentagram earlier, that's what I was talking. I have heard that. I have heard that theory that the bullets were in a pattern. I was thinking pentagram, but that was it, man.
Right.
That's it, yes.
So Oswald, in the book Depository, would have been the one to the left, the grassy knoll shooter, who people, claim they've seen.
Right.
That was the second assassin on the right. And then the third one, who we don't know, now there's been allegations that it was the driver.
I was going to ask you about that.
Right.
If you think the driver had anything to do with it. William Cooper swore by that.
Right.
I remember that was one of his biggest, I guess, quote-unquote selling points was that the driver actually turns around and pops him point blank.
But basically that's the pattern we see for assassinations at that level is there will be 3 assassins involved and the Rosicrucian cross is used. And so if if the plot's blown open, then one person will take the fall.
Right.
Now, a lot of times these could be people who don't even know each other. They're recruited.
Sure, right, man. They would never have met, never have had any contact. They would have feelers or handlers.
Right.
Handlers.
The assassination that kicked off World War I of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, that used the Lorraine Cross.
Oh shit! I did not know that.
Martin Luther King's assassination. Do you know what hotel he was staying at?
No, I don't.
The Lorraine Hotel.
No shit.
Right.
Yep.
God damn, man.
Yeah.
See, that's mind blowing to me. I mean, I get in conspiracy theories, quote unquote, but man, this is new. This is new information. That's insane. And you know, guys, like, I don't know if that's true. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if there's really these organizations that work like that. But man, it sure as hell makes you. I think it should at least raise some questions for people.
Or, I mean, there's. Good night, man. There's so much symbolism we can dive into. I mean, you know, hell, if you want to talk about names, I mean, which I think we have to bring up names and symbolism because, you know, Jack Ruby was a fake name.
No, I did not, man.
No, in 1947, his real name was Jacob Rubenstein.
Yeah.
And he changed it to Jack Ruby.
I didn't know that.
And one thing that's interesting about that is that Jack Ruby is an old pawnbroker's term that means fake piece of jewelry.
Right. No shit.
Or fool's gold.
Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that.
Or, I mean, if we dive into it even further, Oz, as a prefix in Latin, means power or strength, but it also conjures up the idea of the Wizard of Oz, because that's the
curtain.
context from our time, and ruby slippers.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Kennedy was buried in Arlington, Virginia. Oswald buried in Arlington, Texas.
damn, man.
Arlington is an old Masonic term that's linked to necrolatry, or the elevation of the dead to a place of worship, and the eternal flame.
Right.
That's insane. And you know, one thing that I think about, you know, let's just hypothetically, let's say this is, you know, honest to God, let's say there is these groups, let's say there are these, you know, I mean, Luciferian, I guess, possibly, you know, as a word, I mean, or diabolical.
Well, yeah, I would say Luciferian's not exactly accurate, but I think that it's a useful term to convey to the common person or the uneducated on this stuff what they would imagine Luciferianism to be.
Right.
I mean, this is a whole subject for another day, but I kind of hold to the belief that there's religions out there that average people have no idea even exist.
Right.
That the way rich the high up are into.
Right, man. Just ancient, quote unquote forgotten as far
Right.
as the populace goes. But you know what I was thinking? If these groups, you know, a diabolical group or groups do this, I can absolutely, if we're going to think that, man, then I can absolutely see why symbolism would absolutely be there, because to me, these kind of groups would want to put their calling card out. You know, hell,
Right.
man, even when we do our podcasts and stuff, we like to put little things in our artwork, just little symbols, you know, just for us. Now, imagine that on a completely higher level.
Right.
You know, I mean, of course. I mean, I don't think that that's, you know, irrational to think at all, man. If this stuff is, you know, it's legit, man.
Right.
Which, you know, once again, I'm not going to say whether it is or not, but
Well,
I have my opinion.
there's a ritual in Masonry called the Killing of the King ritual, and you know, there was a writer named James Shelby Downard who, back in 1987, I believe, with the first edition of the book Apocalypse Culture, the compilation, he wrote a piece called King Kill 33, or The Killing of the King at 33 Degrees. You know, Marilyn Manson ended up doing a song on his Kennedy concept album about it. But, you know, it really dives into it. It talks about how one of the things, probably a stamp you see on the events that I maybe find just about the most interesting of the whole thing, is that day in Dallas, there were 3 hobos who were arrested and looked into. Do you know about this? Have you heard about it?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I remember one. I don't remember the other 2.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this.
So check this out. There were 3 hobos who were arrested, and this is supposedly symbolically linked to the 3 unworthy craftsmen in masonry.
Right.
So the idea is, okay, why would they do that? Why would they just pick these 3 hobos up, charge them, and say, we're going to look at you for what happened today, and then immediately release them?
Right.
Well, the idea behind that is that it's a psychological blow
Okay.
to the people, to Kennedy's people, I guess you could say, to people who are in the know about what happened and said, okay, this is a coup by these people who are high up in government. It's symbolism to illustrate the futility of trying to investigate into it.
It's basically sending them a message.
Yeah.
It's like you're
The
not
same
going to
as
be able to...
the same as putting a horse head in.
Hell yes, man. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like you're just, you're not going to be able to bring us down.
Right.
This thing, especially at that time. Pre-internet, excuse me, cable news, things like that, man. Well, hell yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no way to bring it down at that particular time, especially when they hold all the power.
Well, I mean, for example, LBJ, Earl Warren, Gerald Ford, J. Edgar Hoover, and Allen Dulles, all 33rd degree Masons.
Yes.
Wow.
On the Warren Commission, there was only one guy who was not a Mason. He was also a Catholic, like Kennedy was. Representative Hale Boggs was his name.
Right.
Now, apparently, as far as the stories go, he initially agreed with the findings of the commission, but later came to say, I've got some questions about this. There's a lot of things that are strange popping up. And, like I said, he was very much an outsider to secret societies. He wasn't one of the good old boys.
Right.
He was killed in a plane crash.
That's convenient. Very convenient.
Right.
Well, let me turn this from the conspiracy side of it to the, I want to say, almost supernatural side of it, as far as what people have talked about and labeled as the Kennedy curse.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that, as far as it going down the line?
Are you talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Well, no, I'm talking about
it's a
Kennedy.
joke. You know the joke about the reason why Maria Shriver married Schwarzenegger to breed bulletproof Kennedys.
Right, right.
Shit. No,
yeah.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
As far as going down the line, JFK, obviously.
Bobby.
Well, even before that, with the smaller brother that got
Jackie.
Was
it Jackie Kennedy?
I think so.
I don't know, man.
I want to say the smaller brother had died, early on in his life.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
Then of course Robert.
Right.
And then you go on.
Ted had some of his issues.
Yeah.
Well, he had issues.
Ted had a lot of issues.
But he never went anywhere. But
understatement.
Yeah.
Not the best driver.
Exactly.
I've heard.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then obviously to Junior.
Right.
Coincidence, links, or curse?
I can remember back around 1999, I believe this was the year of it, and being in the bookstore at a mall a couple towns over, and there was a book they had on display of Nostradamus prophecies, and they were cashing in on the Y2K thing, putting it right there front and center.
Right.
But this book, I wish I knew the title of it or could go back and look at it now, but it had prophecies listed out month by month.
Right.
So if I'm remembering this right, because I don't have it right here in front of me to tell you what date it was that Junior died on, but for shits and giggles I go, okay, what's it say for June 99 or July 99, whichever it was.
Right.
And the Nostradamus prophecy listed said the son of the king or the son of the uncrowned king will fall from the sky and the world will mourn.
Oh shit.
Wow.
So let me ask you, do you believe in his prophecies? Because I was always a little on the fence.
That was
with it,
actually
man.
July 16th of 1999.
So
Okay.
it'd be right
Yeah,
there.
so they would be right at Y2K and
Yeah. And the prophecy. Yeah, Nostradamus. I don't know. I was always.
I don't know. I'm not. No, not really.
No, I mean either. But I will say, man, that's
Well-worded.
intriguing. I mean,
Yeah.
that is.
It's
like
it
real
is intriguing.
well worded coincidences.
I think so.
I think
that's always been my.
See,
that can
I'd
be
go with
left
the
for
opposite.
impotent.
I wouldn't even say well-worded coincidences. I would say that they're purposefully so oblique that nothing can be predicted with them. You can only apply them to things in
interpret.
hindsight, and then they're so not obscure. Not what's the word I'm looking for. They're so wide open that they can apply to almost anything.
Right.
Really open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Kind of how zodiac, horoscopes, I kind of consider that to be in the same vein. You
Yeah.
know,
For
they're
sure.
so open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, man, I can go down and read all 12 signs. I'm like, well, shit, I can almost relate to all of them in
Right.
certain
Yeah.
ways, you know. But
Exactly.
yeah, Nostradamus, I am not. But I will say, Doc, that is a hell of a prophecy for that time. I mean, that is, once again, it's intriguing. you
Right.
know.
But see, I mean, that's also, they talk about the uncrowned prince falling from the sky, but I mean, maybe to some people he was the uncrowned prince. To other people, he was just a dude.
Yeah, really, man. Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
Or it
so
could have been Prince falling down, some stairs that day, on that particular day.
Or
Prince Charles or the artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it could have just been, nonsense.
Right.
I mean, truth be told,
Yeah.
it could have just been so
Yeah.
let's just write some shit down. And, it's kind of like when fortune tellers, can tell you your fortune. They'll ask you certain questions. And,
Right.
it's just read, man. They're working marks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is really what it is.
But it's amazing that we can sit here, and good God, I mean, we're coming up on how many years now?
53, I believe.
53. I
Yeah,
mean,
man. Yeah.
so many decades later that we are actually still here talking about this thing, and it's amazing the impact that it's had on just culture
Yeah.
for
Ever since.
over half a century now.
And I've always kind of considered his assassination to be sort of the end of the innocence,
Right.
the quote unquote. Now, needless to say, society in the 50s wasn't innocent,
Right.
but it was portrayed as
Right.
such.
Right.
And even we think of Happy Days, we think of things like that when we think of the 50s. Obviously it wasn't really like that behind closed doors.
Yeah, and
Right.
the thing about
You
that,
know.
it was its illusion, because to a large degree, what you can blame for, I say blame, that's not really the best word, but what you can really credit with what created the Leave It to Beaver atmosphere of the 1950s was this collective gut response to everything seen in World War II.
Amen.
And
Right,
this idea
right.
that we need to harness it back, that as a culture we sort of lost our innocence a bit.
Right.
And even if this is just us deluding our kids,
Still, it's
Yeah.
better than all the horror that we saw during World War II.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That
All
does.
right.
Yeah.
So going back to this thing, and this has just popped up into my mind, with the assassination, with it being recorded, do you think that they had ever thought about that?
what,
From
like
the
the
outset.
Zapruder film?
Yeah. Do you think they would have ever thought about that at that time, that it would have been recorded,
Right.
or
right.
there would have been a piece of history that would have captured this moment?
That's a good question. I don't know
is.
quite how to answer that.
Right.
That is, man, because that technology was still fairly new.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. I mean, you got to think these people that are plot. If once again, I always like to put that preface in there. If this is legit, I would assume that these people would be older. From another generation.
For
I
sure.
mean, would they even consider TV cameras and stuff?
I'm
like
sure,
that? That's a good
at
question.
at that point, you're thinking, oh my God, somebody's caught this on camera.
Hell, we didn't think of that. shit.
We've got,
Well, that's
we
like
may
did
need
the
to scramble
people-
on this thing and kind of.
That's like did the
Right.
people who, not to use loaded language, but orchestrated 9/11. Did they envision YouTube?
Right.
Amen,
Did they
Seriously,
envision
right.
the idea that, like you and I had talked about before, how we have an entire demographic of young people below age 30, a lot of them in their early 20s, who have taken on 9/11 conspiracy as their pet topic,
like a hobby.
their hobby,
Right.
and they might pick one area of it to specialize in, like the political side, thermodynamics, symbolism within it,
Right.
things of that nature, and they can tell you what happened that day down to the minute
You're right.
or
right.
the quarter
second,
minute.
yeah.
Yeah.
All these details that we probably haven't
Absolutely.
You
seen
can
or heard.
you
Absolutely.
can log online any nights of the week and retreat to corners of Reddit or whatever website you want to, and you'll find them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. It's there. We were talking about another conspiracy theory a little earlier. I won't go into it, but everything I read up on it was on Reddit.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a website, man. Yeah.
Oh,
it's a
for
lot.
sure.
Oh, man. It goes pretty deep. But Doc, I was going to ask you, and I know you've got a format, but can we talk a little bit more about the symbolism? So is there
Of course.
Yeah, because that stuff really truly fascinates me, man. Because I do agree that if these diabolical groups would do something, I think 100%, man, that they got to put their fingerprint on it. I think they'd be too much of an ego not to do it.
And if for no other reason, just because it's the default mode of how they think.
Right.
Even when they're not intending to send a message, it's like the idea of a Freudian slip.
Yes, sir. Right. And I think it's just a kind of a fuck you too. It's like, fuck you. We're gonna put our fingerprints all over this thing, and you won't even know it.
Right.
We'll know it. And other people that we're in cahoots with will know it, but the regular population, wouldn't know. So yeah, I'd like to maybe discuss some more of that symbolism and some more of that. And one thing I do want to say, just to kind of put this out there, we're not saying Freemasons are evil. The basic the people. I know some Freemasons. Good people. I mean, they're great people.
No, I think See, I don't even know that I like to blame Masons for anything like that, because I think the majority of people you meet in any secret society, not just them, they're people like your grandpa who drive like riding the go-kart in local parades, like doing charity work.
Right, man.
And on that level, it's more like a fraternity than it is a society.
But I think that with all these groups, there's an inner core of the super rich elite old money, who this is their way of networking, and
yes.
You'll see symbolism. It's not even to suggest that the group itself, it's that it's what these guys were into.
Right. An old professor that I had when I was back in college back in the 90s, he was really big into conspiracy. That was another person who was very influential on me getting into this stuff, because he was, he was older and, obviously professor, but he was, man, he knew his stuff as far as seemed to know his stuff anyway.
Right.
But one thing that he said two things he said that really stuck out to me all these years later. One was the Democratic and Republican Party are just flip sides to the same counterfeit coin. I'll never forget that.
Absolutely.
And the other thing he said was not all Freemasons are in the Illuminati. He did use the Illuminati, but all Illuminati are in the Freemasons. I don't know if that would be fair, but man, it makes once again it makes you wonder.
Exactly.
In other words, it could be a way in to these organizations.
So what was some of the symbolism you were wanting to dive into?
Oh man, just whatever you have. I mean, like I said, I'm glad we talked about the cross and the bullets, because like I said, I do remember hearing that. The 33rd degree parallel, I do remember hearing about that as well. Is there anything else? Because like I said, man, that stuff to me just completely fascinates me.
Well, again, going back to what we were talking about literally just a second ago, about how it's sort of what this group of the really well-connected old money are into. This is a whole other rabbit hole to dive into, but America is really founded on Masonry more than anything, even more than any of the ideals we like to put out, like liberty, equality, justice for all that.
Self-government.
That really this was the founding of America was as a safe haven for religious fringe groups, but also for secret societies who were being persecuted by the crown.
Right.
And so, you can see it when you really dive into, a good symbolism that it's all over is David Lynch's movies. Right. If you want to look at Blue Velvet, or if you want to look at Eraserhead, if you want to look at Twin Peaks, any of them.
Right.
There is this really deep idea that there's a cheery exterior to what America is, like this really, almost to a corny degree, innocent.
Like Pleasantville.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it's directly contrasted with this extremely dark shadow group that's operating behind closed doors in a lodge like area. With Eraserhead, it's the lady in the radiator. With this idea that the real power is an unseen hidden hand that's chock full of occult symbolism.
Right.
Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks, the Black Lodge. I can go on and on with it, but
You know, one thing that I always found fascinating, and I didn't even know this until I was in college, and this professor I was talking about earlier is one that told me this. You know, George Washington, and I think maybe even Adams. So, in other words, man, there were a lot of presidents that actually took the oath of office on the Masonic Bible.
Right.
And I swear, man, back in this day, about 2-3 weeks, maybe month later or whatever, I had another class, and we were watching the swearing in of George Bush, Senior, the one who just passed away. And they brought up how he was getting sworn in on the Masonic Bible. And, you know, we just heard this with our professor, just like I said, about a month or so earlier. So it just really blew all of our minds. It's like, holy shit, there it is.
Yeah.
And it's not being hidden. It's not being trying to put under the radar. I mean, they're like, and George Bush will be taking the oath on this Masonic Bible. And I believe it was the same one that Washington used.
A parallel example of it, of the David Lynch symbolism we were talking about, was Mormonism. You know, if you want to say Mormonism is maybe the most inherently American of all religions.
Right.
I mean, think about it. It is this really innocent, cheery exterior put on, you know, a shadow group.
Right.
At the deep core that operates from the inside.
Right.
And, you know, whether you want to say that's the temple, the inner sanctum, or what have you, but, yeah, I mean, it's. You see it pop up with a lot of American religions that were founded after the American Revolution.
Right.
That it's this idea that plays up over and over again that Masonic symbolism is all over the place.
It's in there. It's embedded in it.
It's very much built into the inner structure.
Right.
Like Go ahead. What were you about to say?
Oh no, I was just going with you, man. Yeah, just as far as Mormon, well, you know, to my knowledge, it's one of the only mainstream religions that actually says that, you know, Jesus or whatever was actually here on North America, actually,
right,
in the boundaries and borders here of America.
Well,
to my knowledge.
Well, you know, Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, he was really well versed in all this stuff.
Right.
That there's sources that say, now this isn't something that the churches will talk about at all. They'll deny it. But Joseph Smith was one of the biggest collectors of grimoires.
Now,
if you know what is
that?
Are you familiar with the term of grimoire? It's it'd be similar to the Necronomicon.
Oh no, shit.
Yeah, it's these books that are written by occult. They're compendiums of occult schools of thought written over the years, like the Lesser Keys of Solomon, the Necronomicon, so on and so on.
Right.
But Joseph Smith was a huge collector of this stuff, and as it relates to secret society, he was extremely well versed in it.
Oh wow,
that's insane! I had no idea. That is nuts. Well, I tell you guys what, I know we're about to start hitting the first hour here. Is there anything you guys want to start? Anything you want to close our first segment with?
Well, I do have one thought that I sort of came up with when I was, compiling some things to hit on note-wise with this. We talk about symbolism within Kennedy and how it relates to the larger American culture itself. Do you buy into the idea, and now this might be wingnut territory, but do you believe in the idea that this was symbolically the moment the Irish became white?
Holy shit.
Wow. Okay.
Oh man, I wouldn't even know how to answer that. I don't know. I've never. I'd have to think on that one, brother. That's a heavy question.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, wow. If you, if you definitely
We'll
look
be
at
right
it, it's like no. If you look at it, wow. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I see
that's
it. I can see it, man.
Really?
It's just, I'd have to kind of reflect on that question, but
because at that time, if you're not familiar with that time, that was definitely a different time.
It was. You're right.
As far as they were still kind of considered
lower class,
outsider, immigrants.
Yeah.
This
a lot of prejudice.
This is almost a whole other topic, but Irish people, they're how would you say it? There were, if you go back and look at the feud that they always had with the English people, there's a really fascinating history if you want to really follow the Irish bloodline. The English never considered the Irish to be white.
Right.
And there's been explanations as to why, and some people think it was because of Catholicism versus Protestantism.
Right.
But actually, it goes a good bit deeper than that. And it's a subject I researched a good bit recently, probably about 2-3 months ago, back over the summer. And there's this idea that archaeologists, people who study genetics and people who study history and from a number of fields, they've put this idea together that, and admittedly, it's seen as fringe to a lot of people, but that when you go and look at, Southern Europeans, for example, Southern Europeans like the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Southern Italians, the Greeks, people of that nature, they're essentially a sub-race of Europeans, not quite European, not quite Middle Eastern, not quite North African, like a little mix, little mixture of them.
Got you, right.
Well, one of the things that they're finding, and now it largely makes sense because of both the Moorish presence in Southern Europe for about an 800-year time period after the fall of Rome, up to the Inquisition, but also because Rome was the center of the world.
Right.
The center of commerce, center of trade, and everything, and you had all these groups just sort of all coming together.
Right.
So that sort of creates the olive skin, the dark hair, dark eyes.
Right.
Right. Well, one of the things that's really mind blowing that they found is that the Irish can be lumped in with that also, and nobody quite understands why.
Right.
Because Ireland is so far out there, but the idea is that Irish people are direct descendants of Moors from Spain and Portugal. Obviously mixed with Vikings and Celts and things of that nature. Yes. But the signs and the explanations are pretty fascinating when you dive into it. Like, for example, type O blood is nearly non-existent on the European continent itself, but it's all over the place in Ireland, and it's also all over the place in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and North Africa, like Egypt.
Right.
Yeah. There's other things like how musicologists have studied forms of Irish music that came about, like jig, like folk,
right.
And they've talked about how it's so radically different from anything that ever popped up in, Wales, Scotland, England, or the continent, like classical or ballad.
Right.
And musicologists who have done blind listening to it have said, well, this is music from Turkey or from Morocco or somewhere like that.
Right.
The word Isa means Jesus in only 2 languages, Arabic and Gaelic.
Right.
They found Celtic crosses in, I wanted to say County Kerry. Don't quote me on that, but that have been carbonated and originated from around 500 AD. That there's Celtic crosses that have the word Bismillah on it, which is Arabic for in the name of God.
Oh shit.
So that's what they're sort of coming with,
right.
Is this idea that maybe the reason why the English never considered the Irish white is because they're not really
at the end of the day, genetically.
Right.
Damn, man. Which would go into the prejudice and the basic almost racism. I mean, to a certain degree, I guess you could almost say racism.
Yeah. Which I've always found kind of interesting myself because Southern Europeans, especially Italians and Spaniards, were never treated white in America in the early days, and they were treated in a parallel way to how the Irish were treated, which on the surface doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right, man. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, if y'all want to, before we do that, Reverend, is there anything, man, you'd like to end our first segment with, or?
Well, do you think we'll ever know? Do you think it'll ever be released in our time?
I'm not opposed to the idea that we might get some pretty shittily, if that's a word, thrown together explanations by the corporate media and the administration, but as far as the real truth, no, not a chance.
Okay.
In fact, I don't either. I don't think we'll ever. I don't think like our children will ever see it.
Right.
In other words, I think it's buried forever, man. I'm with the Reverend. I think we may get some bones thrown to us over the next few, generations here and there.
Right.
Or I should say years, not generations, but anything definitive, I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys are good, we're going to go ahead and take a little break, but we're going to be right back with the second part of our show, so y'all don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. What's up, Puds? This is Jason from the podcast with Jason and Mike, and I want to take this opportunity to talk to y'all about GameSwap, located at 112 Northeast Court Square, right here in beautiful downtown Lincoln, North Carolina. Whether you're looking for the best new games and consoles, or you're more of a retro guy like me, GameSwap has you covered. People, I'm talking everything from Atari, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega, PlayStation, Xbox. Hey, there's even systems I've never even heard of before. So if you're a hobbyist, a hardcore gamer, or a collector, GameSwap is the only place to go. And maybe video games isn't your thing. Well, that's cool too, because GameSwap is much more than just a game store. They also carry a vast selection of comic books, toys, t-shirts, and all sorts of collectibles spanning all aspects of pop culture, from science fiction, action, adventure, TV, horror, and all points in between. You really just have to see it to believe it. So what are you waiting for? Get on down here to GameSwap and see it for yourself, and tell them that the Pud sent you. Welcome back to the good news. I'm Thunder Pud number 2, Agent C. What we got coming up next, brother, with the Reverend Doctor?
Well, since we kind of left off with, your groups, your sinister groups, and even in the CIA, our next topic is going to bring us to a subject of mind control, and with the title of MK Ultra.
Right.
Now, I only knew about this in the past couple months.
Right.
And I've been looking into it and trying to see kind of where it all began. Why don't you tell us what is MK Ultra and what it's all about, and where its beginnings came from, and how it's applied to today?
Okay. So, to start with, MK Ultra comes from the German term mind control, but control spelled with a K. Mm-hmm. Because the true roots of MK Ultra, I guess, came from naval intelligence during World War II, and it slightly originated with that, and also partially during the Korean War. But the initial intent of it was to figure out a program that you would use to train American soldiers to resist Stockholm Syndrome in POW captivity.
Right.
That trying to figure out a way how the brain can essentially be mapped out, figure out what makes people crack, how they think, and what can be used to sway and influence thought.
Gotcha.
I guess. So it later on ended up encompassing all kinds of things like hypnotism, like LSD.
Right.
Timothy Leary was an asset himself.
Oh, okay.
Right. But now, officially, according to documents, it says that it started under the name MK Ultra back around 1953, with Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, as one of the architects of it. Now, what gets kind of interesting is, like, when you talk about it being MK, with the K being control and German spelling, this is obviously linked to Operation Paperclip.
Ah, yes, sir.
Can you explain that?
Hey, yeah, I was going to say, Agent C, are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay. Operation Paperclip was a classified program that we ran in the aftermath of World War II, where you had all of these scientists who worked for the Third Reich. And after Germany collapsed, they were basically going to the highest bidder. And it was either going to be us they went to, or Russia.
Right.
So we did a mass buyout on all these guys like Werner von Braun.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And people who became rocket scientists for NASA.
Yes.
And yeah, that's essentially Operation Paperclip is what it was, in a really brief explanation of it.
I always looked at it like a bunch of Nazis pretty much got a free pass to come over here and work for us.
Yeah,
right.
They did
pretty much, But then again, not to to play devil's advocate. If they wouldn't have, who knows where we would be right now?
Exactly.
With the technology.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. But That's what it really basically, in my opinion, boiled down to. Well, we got
because
some
on that
Nazis
side, I mean, these guys were
they're pretty advanced.
yeah, they were advanced. I mean, even further than our guys.
The way I
They were
understand
extraordinarily
Yeah.
advanced. Yeah.
some would even say they had alien influence. I've heard that theory.
You've
We'll
heard-
get into
yeah.
that at some
Oh,
other.
yeah.
Yeah, that'll be another episode. But yeah, man, because I know that they go into like the Bell. Well, once again, I don't want to get into that.
Well, the stuff is all linked because they went to work for NASA,
right.
and there's. Do you believe in the idea that we have a secret space program?
Absolutely,
Yes.
I do. Yeah, I believe in aliens, man. I will put that out there.
I do too.
I'm really, I try to be kind of across the board and skeptical on certain things, especially with the subject matter we're going to. But I do believe in aliens. I don't know if they're from outer space or interdimensional or not, but I do think
I
there's
buy
out
into the
there.
interdimensional.
Me too. I think
Yeah.
that's more feasible. But yes, I do.
There's some pretty fascinating videos that people have used just on visible evidence to support it, where they've talked about seeing UFOs picked up by radar traveling in excess of 700 miles per hour and making 90-degree turns.
I've heard that,
Things that
yeah.
just totally defy the laws of physics. And you can say whether that is, interdimensional, or whether that's nanotechnology we gleaned from Roswell.
All right.
It's, yeah.
Definitely unexplained and definitely not something the mainstream population, is aware of.
Right.
That's why we theorize on it. But yeah, I definitely think,
Right.
definitely think there's more to it than what we know or what we've been told.
Well, were you about to say something?
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. There's a really fast, when we dive into, start talking about the topic of the secret space program, Operation Paperclip, Roswell, so on and
Yes,
so
sir.
on, it links back to MK Ultra in a really, really fascinating way.
So this is a great subject to start this show. I mean, to start
is.
this new, this new show we're
Top,
doing, man.
yeah.
This is, okay.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to throw that in there.
So, one of the chapters of not just this period, but really of American folklore, I guess, of the last century, that anybody listening should really look into if this is a subject you find interesting, is do a Google search for Babylon working.
Okay.
And one of the things you're going to find is, obviously, like we said before, a lot of these guys were, who came from Germany and who had their roots in NASA in its early days were occultists.
Right, so, yeah.
So,
and that's pretty well documented that the Nazis in the occult, or had definitely, dabbled in the occult. Or,
well, at the very least, the upper echelon did. I mean, I think the average, Nazi soldiers were just regular
people, man. Yeah, got pulled in.
And, they say Hitler wasn't even part of it, that Hitler considered himself a traditionalist above all else, but there was an upper echelon within the Nazi party, sort of led, I guess, by Heinrich Himmler, who were very, very into the occult.
Yes.
And they say, by all accounts, by people who were there, that Hitler sort of viewed these guys as dorks.
Right,
I guess.
right.
And, he said, because, he thought politically, he thought realistically, he thought that if I'm going to, win over the population, we're not going to be able to get rid of Christianity to reinstitute the worship of Wotan. And
Right.
all this. But, no, it absolutely existed. There was, this core group, the Thule Society.
Yes, I've heard that name. Wasn't there a woman involved with that who had like extremely long hair, who was apparently said her hair was the connection to the spiritual world? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Well, don't even sweat it, man.
Yeah.
I've just something I saw a while back, and I may even get my wires crossed. So we'll get back on the.
I don't know if I should tell you that sounds familiar or not, because with a lot of stuff on this subject, you see patterns all over the place, and I don't know if it related to that or not, but I vaguely know something of what you're talking
Gotcha.
about.
Cool.
Yeah. So this period, rather the topic you can Google, Babylon working, is there was. Do either of you know much about JPL or Jet Propulsion Laboratories?
Yes.
Okay.
I do not. I'm not
What do you know about its origin?
Nothing on the origin, but it is something that that's come up a lot that I've been seeing.
Okay, well, the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratories was a guy named Jack Parsons, and this was rooted in California back in the immediate period after World War II. And Jack Parsons was a really brilliant guy. He was a rocket scientist, worked with rocket fuel. Basically, like I said, one of the founders of NASA. He was also a very, avowed occultist. He was a disciple of the English black magician Aleister Crowley.
Oh, right.
Okay.
And Parsons essentially led the movement that Crowley was synonymous with, Thelema. He was the head of it for California in America. And in a lot of ways, there's people who will claim that Crowley viewed Parsons as his successor.
Right.
But, the verdict's sort of like, I can't even say it's a verdict because with a lot of that stuff, it's skepticism.
Right.
And nobody knows exactly. But during this period, Parsons ran a commune in California, owned a mansion where it was marketed out to artists, to occultists, to free thinkers, people who I can't say didn't fit in. That's not a good term to use. It's people who were eccentric.
Right, and maybe fell outside of that like Christian type society. Right.
And people would just come there, hang out, crash, live for however long, and whatever, almost like a bohemian type of thing.
Right.
So Parsons got the idea that he wanted to do a ritual called Babylon Working, which was to invoke a female Antichrist figure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, when we start talking about the occult, there's a number of loaded terms, and I don't even know how far to go back explaining it, talking about it. But does the term sex magic ring a bell?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I've heard, yeah.
What do you know? Can you explain it all?
Man, I tell you, I went down a Aleister Crowley rabbit hole one night, and I know it was brought up a lot in that. Basically, it was just wasn't it like orgies, arranged orgies or at least arranged sexual, situations.
To an extent, yeah. A lot of what it links back to is a lot of occultism is based on the idea that, and I know I'm kind of dumbing this down a lot because when you read it, when you read this stuff, people love to overcomplicate it.
Right.
But a large chunk of occultism stems from the idea that a person's life force is found in their bodily fluids.
Right.
And this is a really
Okay.
old primitive belief that they would see when they would inseminate a woman, life would emerge.
Right.
Or when you would bleed out, you'd die.
You die, or people would drink blood.
Right.
To absorb their life force. I have heard that.
Yeah, and that's where virgin sacrifice comes
Right.
from, is that without having sex, a person's less wedded to this world.
Yeah. Right.
And also, if you buy into the idea that there's a veil that separates this reality from the unseen and all other dimensions, that when bodily fluids are spilled, that's when the veil becomes the thinnest.
I see.
Because
I see.
either someone's passing through or
coming back in. Right.
So you have a number of occultists who would believe in the idea that, one of the oldest ideas with regard to ritual is that the use of blood or sperm or Menses blood is the way to unlock this stuff.
Okay. Right. It's like a key.
Yeah.
This is the key to the other side.
Yeah.
Right.
That spilling it is what can, unleash.
Right.
or
I guess
unlock.
make that veil
Right.
thinner or thin. Right. Able to be broken through.
Right.
One way or the other. Right. Got you.
Exactly. So, sex magic is intended to be that mind frame or set of thought put into action through the use of orgies. Now, you'll have a number of occultists who would talk about virgin sacrifice and apply it to masturbation. They believe they could achieve the same results through that combined with either drug trips or meditation or altered states of consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
But there has to be an orgasm. There has to be semen. There has to be bodily fluid spilled. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Right.
Exactly. So,
Thunderpud, how many times have you used the key?
Oh, brother, what today?
how many worlds have you unlocked?
Like I say, today alone, brother, probably too many.
I lost my key.
Yeah.
I'm always losing my key.
Damn it, agency.
So, back at this point in time when Parsons decided he was going to do a ritual that supposedly Crowley himself had never been able to do or complete, that was called Babylon Working, where it would unleash a new, or lead the world into a new eon, or new age.
Got you. Right.
And the way this ritual was done was Parsons and another man who acted as his scribe or his witness went into the desert in the southwest to try to unlock this or perform the ritual. Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The second guy who Parsons took with him was a former member of naval intelligence.
Okay.
Who had just come off some projects with mind control during the war, who was also a disciple of Crowley, who sort of landed there in California.
Right.
The scribe is L. Ron Hubbard.
Bullshit.
Wow.
The founder of
Bullshit.
Scientology. No,
Are
seriously.
you
Never knew
serious?
that.
Seriously.
I never
Never-
knew that.
Never.
Yeah.
Wow.
That blows my mind. I had no idea.
So
that.
it was Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard who did this ritual together. And
Damn.
basically there was a woman who showed up back at the manor or the mansion that they had. I can't even remember the name of what they called it off the top of my head, but it was a woman named Marjorie Cameron, and she ended up full blown occultist and disciple. And Parsons said she was his Scarlet Woman, or the woman who was going to be his magical partner, and he declared the ritual complete. Well, where it gets interesting is some of the things that happened in the immediate aftermath of Babylon Working were Roswell in the Southwest desert.
Right.
Because, a lot of this belief ties into the idea that what we call aliens, angels, demons, jinn, a number of things, are all the same thing.
Right,
They're all
right,
extraterrestrial.
right.
Or not extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional.
Dimensional.
Right.
Yes, sir. I've heard.
Right. And that they've been unlocked at various times by altered states of consciousness, by the veil getting lifted, I guess.
Which would actually, the time lines up.
Right.
Wow.
So
I've never heard
there's
that. Jesus Christ.
there's a number of things of that nature, but in the aftermath of it, Parsons ends up dying in a lab explosion, dealing with rocket fuel. Hubbard goes on to start a sci-fi religion.
Seriously, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
And to this day, it was huge. I mean, Scientology is huge today, which
Well, and
boggles
that
my mind. But
Scientology is like such a fascinating subject in its own right, because one of the things that you find is how we talk about the roots of MK Ultra being in naval intelligence. In World War II, Hubbard's service record in full has never been released, and there's the line of thinking again that it's because of projects he was involved in.
Right.
yeah, man. Right.
So this is sort of like a hypothetical
sure.
that you'll see come up, but the idea that, let's say, Hubbard was one of a group that were the architects of MK Ultra.
Right.
Well, when he left and he formed Scientology, Hubbard made enemies with the American government early on, and
Right.
he stayed their enemy for the rest of his life.
Oh, yeah.
And now it's sort of naive, in my opinion, to think that it's because, it's this good guy, bad guy
Right.
thing. That, when Dianetics was first written, he presented it to the American Psychiatric Association and the AMA. They rejected. They said this is, folk science. This is
Pseudoscience.
this is a
right.
lunatic revision of Freud, and so on.
Right,
He
right.
ran afoul of the IRS, of the FBI, the FBI and CIA a little bit later on. What part of it was linked to in the mid 1960s, there was a raid on the Church of Scientology in Washington D.C. and again in San Francisco, I believe, over them presenting the e-meter as a medical device.
Right.
It could be used in treating of illnesses. And it moved further and further with allegations that had come up about illegal activities they'd done to silence critics, but there was an internal church policy called Operation Snow White that was carried out by the group within Scientology called the Guardian's Office. That was the easiest way to explain it to anybody who doesn't know is the Guardian's Office was basically the intelligence wing of the church for singling out critics, finding out who they were and how, to stop any public criticism of Hubbard and of Scientology both. Right. So the Guardian's Office was headed up by Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, and several dozen other, high-ranking Scientologists. Well, what Operation Snow White was it's to this day, this is a trivia fact that you can bring up later, it's to this day the single largest infiltration of the American government in history.
No shit.
The AMA, the APA, the Department of Justice, the FBI, number of foreign embassies, and several dozen other, alphabet bodies were all infiltrated by the Church of Scientology for the purpose of finding internal memos, finding out who the enemies were, so that they could deal with them.
So you're telling me, Doc, that the Church of Scientology actually has spies embedded in our government agencies?
Well, they did at one time at least.
At one time, right. But they actually got to that point, at least at one time.
Well, and see, there's a difference when we talk about Scientology. There's the church the way it used to be and the way it is now. Like the church the way it is now. I mean, there's been a lot of things talked about its power structure being a little bit abusive and all these tabloid rumors related to them blackmailing John Travolta for being gay or Tom Cruise using them to shop for women or things like that. But it's kind of this quirky rich person thing now. But when Hubbard was alive, it was a totally different animal.
Right, I got you. So it has kind of had I guess for lack of a better term, somewhat of a reform. I guess. Okay.
Yeah, when Hubbard was alive, the church really had teeth to it, and it was just a group. The way in the media Scientology is so pounced on now and talked about. Back, 20 years ago, journalists didn't even dare bring it up.
No, you rarely heard about Scientology, man, other than the Dianetics commercials. That's really the only time I ever heard of Scientology, up until, probably like the last 15 years or so.
So, one of the things that gets alleged, though, and this is, again, like, tying it back to the skeptical nature of what exactly happened, is if Hubbard was involved with this project, if he was an architect of MK Ultra, why could it be that the reason why the government targeted him, from really 1945, 1950, all the way up till his death in the mid-'80s, did it have more to do with the fact that he took their shit and went into business for himself.
Right, man.
That it's not a good guy versus bad guy thing. It's not like, the American government being heroes and saying we're going to stop this abusive thing. It's that you took our shit.
Yeah, that shady as hell to begin with.
Yeah,
man.
You went into business for yourself.
Yeah, in other words, it's like bad guy versus bad guy.
Exactly.
Here, with basically what I consider to be somewhat diabolical technology here, man. You're talking about mind control. I mean, Jesus Christ, man. I mean, how much invasive can you get?
I'm looking at his net worth at the time.
Whose net worth?
L. Ron Hubbard's.
Yeah.
$600 million
at that time.
Now,
and what year was this, Mike?
This was the 80s.
In the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesus, man.
Yeah, 86 was when he died. If I believe it was 1980 that he was never able to be fully indicted for Snow White, and that his wife largely took the fall for it. The court case was the United States of America versus Mary Sue Hubbard, and there's been lawyers and people who were there who said that this was a top-down operation by, the FBI that said we had a long-term goal of getting Hubbard, but they were never able to connect him on paper because it was purposely done that way. All internal church documents made it look like Hubbard was never connected. That he was just this ecclesiastical leader, I guess.
Almost like a figurehead, I guess, to a certain degree. Right.
So, in 1980, in the aftermath of Snow White, he was a fugitive and went into hiding, spent the rest of his life, and they said when he died he ended up looking like Howard Hughes, and it was just a long far gone thing, and I mean that's kind of the church up to the status quo at this point. I mean, there's been a lot of minor stuff, but really that was all the point. It was is that the church now versus the church when Hubbard was alive are two totally different animals.
Right.
Yep.
It's almost a novelty now. It seems like, man. It almost seems like in kind of a quote unquote whipping boy as well. You know, man.
Right.
You see a lot of negativity, which from what I've seen, man. I mean, it doesn't sound like it is the best place to be. You know what I mean? From what I can tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fascinating, man. I had no idea that L. Ron Hubbard. I had no
I guess
idea.
he kind of wound up, the same way as Crowley did. Kind of disheveled in the end, and just a shell of what he was formerly.
Right.
Well, and there was, both those guys, they kind of had to be hidden away from the public, because with Hubbard, for example, when this image of you's been projected as being, the most spiritually advanced, enlightened, figure to ever live. Dementia, Alzheimer's, being drug-addled after years, that really doesn't speak well to what you're preaching.
Yeah, right, exactly, man. Kind of goes against the whole system, I mean, really. Yeah. Man, that's fast. I had no idea that Hubbard was that connected to Crowley.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's shit, man. I've learned a lot of shit today. I mean, that's all I'm going to say, man. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Damn, it's only the first show, man.
Yeah. So, with regard to MK Ultra, when it was first rolled out, I guess, in any way that the public remembers in a way that would ring a bell with people now, if you talk to them. You remember learning about the things in school where in movie theaters back in the 50s, how they would put split-second images, to spike
popcorn
sales
or something,
yeah.
Right?
Well, that's sort of an idea that you see was that at some point this technology fell into the hands of corporations and industries, and it's used for programming.
You're right.
Nowadays,
to kind of implant that seed, that mental seed, right?
And MK Ultra is really everywhere.
Subliminal
now.
message.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm looking, because, of course, you go to the YouTube, you see a lot of the stuff, a lot of the videos. I'm seeing a lot of the videos with the MK Ultra attached to celebrities.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that something that's actually linked to a celebrity, or is that just celebrities just being celebrities being dumb?
Right.
So are you asking, was Miley Cyrus programmed?
Right.
Or was she just an airhead?
Is she?
God, I hope it's programmed, man. I think that would just make me feel better.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing, these videos of Shaq with the dumb look on his face, and I'm thinking, okay, that's Shaq with the dumb look on his face.
Right.
But they're presenting it as, he's
Under
shutting
control.
down, under control, shut down, and yeah.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of those videos start with this starting block that these people should be, that Shaq should be Carl Sagan.
Right.
Or something that he should be brilliant and should never have pauses when being interviewed.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I mean...
Or even the celebrity breakdown, they'll present that as the MK Ultra, something's wrong in the programming.
Yeah, they got a wire burned out.
Or they have handlers, or stuff like that.
Mike, I mean, would that kind of go back what we were talking about, like Jay-Z and Beyonce? Are you kind of talking about in that form, or are you talking about? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or would it be more like absolutely controlled, like these people are?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, definitely controlled.
Controlled.
Yeah, controlled completely.
Well, there's a term that they use for Disney child celebs called sex kitten programming. Now, have you ever gone down the rabbit hole and read about this?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. Programming is another loaded term we use because the immediate image that's going to pop to people's mind is somebody like a Clockwork Orange style, strapped to a chair, being forced to watch images and programmed like in a lab.
Right.
But it's really can be something far more subtle than that. Like Disney is sort of like a big one you should look at when you're talking about sex kitten programming. Say you have these child stars, like whether it's Britney Spears, whether it's Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, I mean, whoever, really. But say you have a child who's coming up as a star within the Disney studio system. Well, they have ways of controlling their environment and controlling their perception where they can say, we're going to surround you with handlers 24 hours a day to where you're not going to have a normal childhood.
Exactly.
will use your internal suppression of your urges or whatever in order to sell, to make this genre of art that's going to promote you as this, chaste, very clean, innocent entertainment.
Right.
But then when you turn 18, we're going to totally pull the reins off.
Molly Cyrus your ass.
Yeah, and let you go crazy. And we reap the profits both ways.
Shit, man. I mean, if you think about it, that's exactly what happened with Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Miley Cyrus.
Yep.
They all have mental breakdowns around their, mid-20s.
And they go straight sex pots, man. I mean, look at Britney and Christina from back in the day, man. I mean, Jesus Christ, they went from the clean angelics to straight up hoes, man. I mean, as far as being presented as such, and Miley Cyrus as well. Shit, man, I never thought about it like that, but damn.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying if it's true or not. I mean, obviously we're just talking here and theorizing, but goddamn, man, that's what did happen. I mean, at least for those 3 examples.
Right.
Shit. Goddamn, Doc, you gonna have me all kinds of...
You're going to be watching out for the next one to crack the breakdown from the Disney Channel.
Hell yeah, man. I'm going to start monitoring this shit. But no, man, that's fascinating because, I mean, that's... As far as I can tell, that's basically... And you also hear about these child, actors and actresses, from the Disney Channel and other, obviously not just Disney. Man, they have such terrible adulthoods, man. They have, drug addictions. They have, these... Just all these terrible things that happen to them, man.
Well, I think...
You gotta think.
See, I personally think... I subscribe to the belief that it's because, if one of the greatest acts of child abuse a parent can commit is putting your child in show business.
Oh, I fucking agree with that.
I mean, you're basically, when you look at Drew Barrymore, Macaulay Culkin, it's basically children being thrown to the wolves.
Yes, sir. And they have no idea how to handle that stuff, man.
No, and the casting couch culture, probably about the biggest secret in Hollywood is that it applies to children just like it applies to actresses.
Right.
And that's been out for years, man. I mean, there's documentaries, from the 90s on this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
Have you ever seen that meme that, this is deep water shit right here, but there's a meme from sometime back in the 1980s, probably like 86, 87, and it's Steven Spielberg, and he's got a young Drew Barrymore sitting on one knee, and Heather O'Rourke, and it says, "Ask Steven Spielberg what happened to Heather O'Rourke."
I've seen that, yeah, man.
I'm not going to go into it here, but that is,
All right.
That's like you just said, brother. That's deep in, and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah,
that's why we use pseudonyms.
Yep.
Right.
But, damn, man, that's... Well, yeah, let's get back on subject, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to...
So, a question for Agent C.
Yes.
Is when, we talk about MK Ultra like this, what do you think are some of the prime objectives of why they would have a specific interest in controlling the mind of the population, or at least dumbing people down?
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost it would be what's the term I'm looking for? I guess patriotic assertion or patriotic.
Man, I think it boils down to just power. Having power.
Definitely
over the
power,
people, man,
but I think one of the number one things would be your belief and trust in government.
Got you. Right.
As far as what your government is doing is right and right for you.
Right. Absolutely. Like I said, I think it just boils down to power, man, and keeping people, held back. I mean, even though I do think our country, I don't want to get too political here. I do think our country's pretty damn good as far as regular people being able to come up and to achieve a certain amount of success. But I do think there's probably people that don't want regular people to get too high up.
Right. I mean, keeping people dumb, or dumb enough to where, smart enough to where you can do a make-work job.
Right.
But dumb enough to where you're not going to be, not so much in a power grab, but where you're really clued into what's going on.
Right, exactly, man. You don't know. I think we even talked about this last time you was down, Rev. It's one of those situations to where you can't pinpoint what's wrong. Mm-hmm. You just know that something is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, but like I said, it's just hard to pinpoint it, man, because in this country we do have comforts and security. I mean, you know, I'll tell people sometimes, I'm like, you hear that? No, exactly. That's a bomb not dropping on your fucking house.
Right.
That's a good point.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I look at it like that, but it doesn't mean that there isn't something wrong, and it also doesn't mean that regular type people can still come up more. You know what I'm saying? I mean, just because we do have the comforts, just because we do have the security, doesn't mean that it's 100% great.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, to a lot of people,
for sure.
You know,
For
to
sure.
a lot of people, you know, comforts are what we associate with America. It's, you know, going back to our first hour, you know, we use the term liberty, equality,
right.
fraternity, like, you know, the French Revolution or the American Revolution. But nowadays, I mean, it's sort of more Black Friday shopping, Kardashians, McDonald's.
Yeah, man.
Right.
You know, I was watching something just the other day, or reading, I can't remember which one, but it was talking about communism versus capitalism back in the 80s with the Russian bloc, Soviet bloc,
Right.
and America. Man, and this quote really hit me. Like I said, I just heard a couple of days ago. They said in the Soviet bloc, nothing went, but everything mattered.
Right.
Whereas in America, everything goes and nothing matters.
Right.
And I was like, damn, that's profound as hell,
Yeah.
man. You know, to really think about it like that. Just want to throw that little.
That's deep.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I thought so as well. I was like, shit, man, that's a trip. You know.
Well, here's a question that's tied into it, but it's sort of a lead-in question because it addresses a lot of other things as far as this goes. Do you believe in the idea that we are in a mass asbestos situation right now? What I mean by that is back in the day when, you know, asbestos was this miracle product,
Right.
And we find out later that it causes super tumors.
Right. Mesothelioma and
Okay.
all that shit.
Right.
Right. It's terrible stuff, man.
That we have a number of things now that, you know, whether it's preservatives in food,
Amen.
whether it's, you know, household cleaners,
Medications.
in fact, medications, lingering radiation in the atmosphere, hell, the fact that you carry around an object in your pocket that gives out and receives signals all day.
Right.
Right.
You know, we've
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of forgotten the idea that living tissue isn't meant to be constantly bombarded with chemicals and electricity.
Or radio or microwaves
Right.
that we get
Yeah.
from our phones and our microwave ovens, of course.
And sort of what I'm asking is, do you believe that in 20 or 30 years that it's going to be like asbestos but exponentially larger? It's going to come out that they're going to go, okay, no wonder this generation had, you know, such a substantial autism spike.
Right.
Or
Cancer.
that
Right.
1 in 3
Right.
people are catching cancer.
Right.
man. I think so. I absolutely think so. I mean, obviously it's hard to answer that, you know, for sure. But yeah, I think it's absolutely
Right.
possible, man. In
Well,
fact,
how long did it take? I mean, for them to figure out that asbestos and even lead paint,
yeah,
you know,
that's another one.
was something that, or lead gasoline. You know, that was something that. Okay, this is
killing us.
This is killing us.
It's literally killing
This-
us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, and you know, Reverend, something you talked about, and I know, man, we're getting a little off subject, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen a lot on this
Oh,
show.
yeah.
When you're dealing with
It's all
the
linked.
agent, brother, that's
Yeah.
It's all linked.
It is, man. It all does come together. But well, damn, man, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, jeez.
It'll come back, man. It'll come back.
Okay, one thing I was sort of going to lead into is when there have been nuclear incidences like Hiroshima, like Chernobyl, one of the things that you see overlap is that the first generation of people who were exposed, you know, they have their own effects that are understood, but the children, the grandchildren, come out mutants, come
Right.
out retarded.
Right.
And when you're dealing with chemicals of this nature, it's like they seep into the DNA and they never truly leave.
And they stay there.
And there's been a lot of theoretical research that's gone on in recent years anyway, where it suggests that you can find that with not just radiation but a number of chemicals, like for example experimental batches of acid that went around in the 60s,
Right.
where when you look at a lot of these conditions that children are being born with now, like autism, like the easiest way I can define it is conditions that they inhibit, or maybe inhibit's not the right word, but
maybe affect.
They affect in that they almost preclude reproduction.
Got you. Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right. Got
like
you.
Their developmental, you could, there's people who have, on the theoretical side, have lumped transgender children into it, or gender identity disorder.
Right.
Got you.
But learning disabilities like autism, such and such, where it's almost like when, say, a genetic line becomes damaged.
Right.
Well, it's not going to, because of a chemical seeping in, it's not going to immediately kill the child or grandchild. But let's say if a parent who's exposed to these chemicals, by the time they have 5 grandchildren, it might be a dice throw. But one of the 1 or 2 of the 5 might receive the damaged DNA line, and it's sort of like the brain's protective mechanism saying, okay, but this line isn't meant to pass on. We're not gonna do something like, whether it's
evolution,
man. Right, it's evolution in action, I guess.
Yeah, in other words, it's like we have something that's damaged, it's something that's seeped in, a foreign body, a foreign object, or whatever.
Right.
And so now we have to try, and I'm just theorizing here, man. I have no fucking clue really what I'm talking about. Let me just put that out there. But I mean, for real, but it sounds to me like it would be the evolutionary process. Like, okay, well, we don't want this to keep spreading.
Exactly.
So that's how I'm looking at it. And I just remembered what I was going to say earlier, and kind of on subject, maybe a slightly bit off subject. But you said something on your Facebook a while back, Reverend, that I thought was fucking profound. A lot of stuff you say I find profound, but this one was actually talking about antibiotics. Where you're like, people, because man, it seems like every time you go to the freaking doctor, they just give you antibiotics, and people don't realize that biotics are essential to our body. That much I do know, man. There's bad biotics, there's good biotics, but these antibiotics kill everything. And you had said that people should watch and be more concerned with getting overprescribed these antibiotics than even opiates itself.
Oh, for
absolutely.
sure.
I think that everybody should care a whole lot less about your local doctor prescribing opioids, because that's only going to affect one person.
You're correct, right?
And they should care a whole hell of a lot more about their local doctor prescribing antibiotics
to everyone,
because that's what's going to lead us into a dark age.
Yeah. Man, and
because once that's gone,
it's gone.
It's
man.
gone.
Yeah. I mean, once you kill them off, man, that's it. Yep. And I mean, I just wanted to bring that up because that's something I would even like to maybe talk about that even in further podcasts a lot more.
Well,
in depth,
I can sort of briefly explain it. Back when I worked in the medical field, I would sit in break room with, all the doctors I worked with, and you'd sit and listen to these guys talk about this topic the same way, Christian theologians might argue about the Immaculate Conception,
right.
Or the way quantum physicists might argue about string theory. It's this unsolvable dilemma, and when the topic would arise, you could detect the fear in the room over how helpless they knew they were about it. And
that's scary shit to me, man.
Yeah, the easiest way to explain it to anybody is that when there's multiple different kinds of infections you can get, but the 2 big ones are bacterial and viral.
Right.
Now, there's no real treatment for viral infections except to treat the symptoms. You've got to let your body do its thing and fight them off.
Sure, right.
Now, there have been meds that have come out in really recent years, but basically all they do is boost the immune system. But fighting off a virus is something your body has to do on its own.
Exactly, right.
Now, a bacterial infection, on the other hand, that's what antibiotics are used for.
Got you.
And when penicillin first came out, it was a miracle drug.
Right.
Well, because it kept getting overprescribed, you have a situation where, like with antibacterial hand soap, where it only kills 99.9% of germs, but that 0.1 is the harmful kind, not the protective surface bacteria that is going to create superbugs over germ lifetimes and generations.
Right.
So they used, we reached the point where penicillin wasn't treating everything anymore. So they had to make amoxicillin.
Amoxicillin, right.
And then so on and so on.
Right.
You have people who just, either a doctor overprescribes it, or you'll have people who make demands. That's a whole other side topic that I could talk about forever. How, one of the ways America is unique is we're one of the only nations that advertises prescription medication on television.
Yeah.
And that's a fairly recent thing. I mean, well, when I say fairly recent, I'm talking within the last 20 years or so.
Right.
It seems like it wasn't around in the 80s as much. It seems like I don't really remember seeing prescription ads to about the 90s.
Right. When when you think about it, it makes no logical sense why it should exist, because if when you go to the doctor's office, they see what's wrong with you and they write
a prescription,
and they tell you, they say, this is what's wrong with you.
Right.
There's no logical reason except for the fact that it's become a consumer industry.
It's a consumer-based product now.
Imagine this stuff on television, them saying, well, tell your doctor you think you need such and such.
Right.
So anyway, back to my point, that was a total side topic. But, amoxicillin no longer treated everything, so they had to keep inventing. Well, the last class of that family that they had left was vancomycin. And, we'd started to reach the point where that's not even killing anything anymore. And you're eventually going to arrive at the point, whether it's 15 years, 20 years, however long in the future, where we're going to be in a medical dark age, where people are going to be dying from skinned knees.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'll get a scrape in the woods or something, and man, that could be it. I don't know if people realize how for real that is, man. I mean, we're so spoiled with our modern medicine.
Yeah, how much we've really fucked everything up by overdoing antibiotics.
Exactly, man. Because you brought up the hand sanitizer, and that's a great point too. I never use that shit, man, unless
and you shouldn't.
Exactly, because I've read on that as well. It's like, man, it's killing all the good. Everybody hears bacteria and think automatically it's bad. Well, we got to no, man. I mean,
it's not.
It's not.
Right.
Exactly. We don't want to kill, just like the antibiotics. We don't want to kill the good biotics we have, but. Yeah, I just want to bring that up, man. That was something, like I said, I wouldn't mind going into that a little deeper in another podcast at some point.
Yeah.
But
it seems like we've kind of drifted off from MK Ultra.
I think
like
we
this
talked
is
about everything but.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, this is a whole other topic.
But it's all linked together. Like I said,
it really does. I mean, the whole point about when people talk about this environmental shit we have going on is a lot of people like to finger point just one thing. They like to say, okay, this is vaccines that have done it, or this is chemtrails that have done it.
Right.
But I don't exclude the possibility that it's any of those, but I think it's way bigger than any of that.
Yeah, I think it's a scapegoat, like especially the vaccines. You hear a lot about that. Now, I don't know, man. I'm not going to sit here and say what I believe, what I don't believe. I mean, I personally would vaccinate if I did have kids, I would. I'll say that much. But I'm not closed-minded to the idea that maybe it could have something to do with autism. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely say that personally, I would. And I would suggest people would vaccinate your children, but hey, man, I'm not going to sit here and say for sure one way or the other. But
yeah, and one of the things
I think it's a scapegoat.
One of the things, like how when I say it's an asbestos situation, or that's what I, have a sincere conviction that's what we're going to find, is that it's hard to say though whether this is, high up people trying to dumb the population down, or whether this is just the old-fashioned thing of corporations either have no idea that it's like this, or for profit margins and money reasons, they don't care.
Yeah. See,
there's an example. Sorry to cut in over time, but this ties in with it. Do you know the story about the Bayer company back in the 1980s? The prescription company BAYER.
For the like Bayer aspirin.
Yeah.
Right. No, I'm not familiar.
There was a product that they had that was used to treat childhood hemophilia. It was an auto-injector.
Right.
Well, this was back around 1984, I believe, and they learned that a massive shipment they had was tainted with HIV.
What?
Yeah, rather than take it off the market, they offloaded it to the third world.
What? Whoa, man, hold on one second, brother. Let me back up how the fuck did a whole shipment of medication get affected with HIV? I mean, what the?
It was
fuck?
hemophilia auto-injector based, so
Yeah.
It could have been blood-borne.
Okay,
Yeah.
but Jesus Christ, and it got through the fucking cracks. I mean, that sounds conspiracy
Right.
to me.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, man. That doesn't sound like something just fucking...
dude, I mean,
it doesn't sound like somebody
if
just
we
fucked
start
up.
launching the AIDS conspiracy theory,
Oh,
that's
man,
a whole
yeah.
other world.
Yeah.
Brother, that'll be a series.
Yeah.
We'll do a series on that.
Yeah.
But okay, so they offload it to third world.
Yeah, to the third world, and and that's the really shitty part of me about it. I mean, above and beyond anything else was that this was given to children.
Children.
Right.
That
Willingly,
this was
knowingly.
offloaded to Indonesia, the Philippines, to sub-Saharan Africa, South America.
Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
See, shit like that makes me want to go burn down the Bear Corporation's
Yeah.
headquarters, man. Just
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
And
man.
it was
That's
done
branded
just
about
for the
this time?
old-fashioned reason of profit margin.
Just get that fucking profit.
And it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was around this time that they had come out with the findings that you couldn't give bear aspirin to kids.
I don't remember that.
Holy shit, dude! I hadn't even
Yeah.
made that connection. But
Yeah.
you're right.
I think that does ring a bell with me,
Yeah.
man. But damn, y'all heard it here first on the good news, brothers.
Right?
Damn, man.
I mean, you know what? I mean, fuck it, we may as well launch into it. Now, do you have any theories yourself about the origin of HIV and AIDS?
Holy shit.
Wow, that's definitely for another one. That's
Yeah, man. I was gonna
that
say
is
we're
definitely
actually
for another
starting
one.
to
Yeah.
get toward
Okay,
the
a
end of this.
quick
we
one.
can
A
be
spoiler.
here all day
Yeah,
quick
it's a
one.
teaser.
into the night and into tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah.
And we got another one to do tomorrow. So
Yeah.
A quick one is: do you believe the idea about? I can remember when I was in medical training, and we had this 1 day block. I mean, this was over about a 6-month period for a class, but they devoted 1 day just to teaching us about HIV and AIDS and saying it's not exactly like what you've always been told.
Uh-huh.
It's not really sexually transmitted so much as it's a blood disease.
Right.
That
Right.
can be sexually transmitted.
Right.
But because it's blood transmitted, it biologically tends to favor, certain demographics more than others.
Right.
Um,
Children being one, I would imagine, like with blood
Well-
transfusions, stuff like that.
well,
or-
heroin users,
Sure.
homosexuals, where,
I see what you're saying.
male homosexuals.
I got you.
And
Okay.
they said that biologically, because it's bloodborne rather than, sexually transmitted, I mean, to use technical terms, it's kind of is a disease that does discriminate.
Got you. Right.
So,
Right.
one of the things that they talked about,
Because it was also pretty, not to interrupt you, man, but it was also pretty widespread in the black communities as well.
Right.
Is that true? Okay.
well, I mean, this is a whole other point, but they say one of the biggest, what's the term, for at-risk groups,
Right.
that was the term I was looking for, is black women.
Right.
And they say, I mean, this is a whole other topic as to like the reasons why, but they say that it has something to do with the phenomenon of homosexuality in males being far less accepted in the black community than the white community.
Right.
So when you have African American homosexuals, there's a cultural phenomenon
Right.
where there's a tendency to be secretive about it.
Right.
I got you. Right. Where is
So where you were
To
kind
marry or
of
have
yeah,
girlfriends.
the beard.
Right.
Right.
Got you.
Yeah,
Right.
Just basically the beard. To have the wife,
Right.
as the show.
But
yeah,
behind the scenes.
right, you had a totally different life.
Got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
So one of the things that like I remember the instructor telling us, and he said, this is something you should really read into because I can't talk more and more about it, but I can clue you in on something to look
And maybe
into.
point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right.
He said you should look into back in 1980, around the fall of 1980. There were 2 clinics that were set up in 2 different locations. One of them was in the Castro neighborhood of San Francisco, and the other was in Midtown Manhattan.
Right.
And both of these were like just little makeshift clinics that were promoting an experimental hepatitis B vaccination, and their target group it said it was non-monogamous homosexual males.
Right.
And what's interesting is that within 6 months, the first cases
Started
of HIV
popping up.
popped up in those two neighborhoods,
right.
and it just really spiraled out from there.
Right. Well, everyone knows, man, it was from a monkey. Everybody knows that's where HIV come from, right? Yeah. Okay, anyway,
Yeah.
man, yeah. Well, I tell you guys what, we are starting to get towards the end of our show here. Is there anything that we want to make sure we cover before we close this one down? Because, brother, this is the first episode, and this son of a bitch has been white hot. I mean, Jesus, man.
Is Kanye West under control?
I think he's woke as fuck, bro.
Might be right.
I don't know, man. He's one or the other, brother.
All right.
He's either woke as fuck or he is straight up puppet, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
can't put my finger on it.
Bill Hicks. I mean, Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That's one of my favorite conspiracy theories right there. Well, you know, Reverend Brother, you know, for a first show, I think that this is going to really set the pace.
This is a lot
and
of
tone.
fun.
You know, we'll be back next month. As of right now, we're going to go monthly. We'll see where that goes. You know, who knows, man? Sky's the limit. Right now, we'll start monthly and see how it, you know, takes off. But man, this has been something else, brother. You
No
know,
doubt.
last time, you know, I actually did catch you on the podcast here a few weeks back or a month or so ago, and man, I think this one's just going to brother, I think it's going to blow it away. I really do, man.
Absolutely.
Well, like I said, do you guys have anything we want to end with? Agent C, you got anything, brother? Any questions for the good Reverend while we got him here?
Yeah, this is great, dude, and hopefully we'll be doing this on. You know, we're looking at right now what
A monthly basis.
A monthly
as
basis?
of right now.
Yeah.
And kind of see where it goes. Make sure the producer doesn't get too overwhelmed because
he'll be all right.
I did hear a rumor, man, that the Puds may be branching off a little bit here and there, but
Yeah, absolutely.
man,
Maybe even make a community.
we could, man. We can go from Pudville to Pud Nation, you know,
Right.
Dynasty.
All
the
right.
dynasty,
Yeah.
brother. But yeah, man, as of right now, we'll be back.
Caliphate of Pud.
God
Yeah.
damn it, man. But yeah, I got to use a pseudonym because I don't want to get fired. Because I know as this show progresses, man, we're gonna get controversial. There's subjects that I want to get into, and there, you know, there's a lot of subject matter, brother, that a lot of people out there, you know, they get a little
Uneasy.
yes, sir.
Right.
To put it mildly, brother, to put it very mildly. But we're gonna carry on, and man, this is just the first of several to come. And Reverend, brother, man, Jesus Christ, I don't even know what to say. Other than I'm gonna go home and probably hit some YouTube. I know that
absolutely.
much.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, that's what we talked about on the first episode we did was, you know, don't swallow everything.
Right.
Say, use it as a lead into your own research.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's
Look
golden.
into it.
That's
know?
golden, man.
Dig.
Don't take anybody's word for it. Find out
Right.
for yourself. And you know, I know on the first podcast when we were all together, you know, I always put that out there. You know, I don't know. You know, Mike, I know, man, me or you, neither one. We're not experts
No.
on this stuff. I mean, you know, the
A
Reverend.
lot
I
of
know
this stuff I'm just learning about.
Yeah,
you know,
me
just
too.
hearing about for the first time.
I mean, I know the Reverend. I know you spent a lot of years, brother, researching stuff. You have an education. I mean, that's one thing I always loved.
Doctorates.
Doctorates, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you are a Reverend and you are a doctor.
Yes.
This is not
That's
a
right.
nickname, man.
Right.
You
Nope,
know,
not a nickname.
This is legit. And one thing I've always loved, and I think we did talk about this on the podcast, you know, you always see people when they get into their debates or straight up arguments on Facebook, you know, people say, well, go educate yourself. You
Right.
need an education. Who the hell's going to tell you that?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, really. It's
True
like,
that.
I mean,
Yep.
so that's why I enjoy having you here, and that's why I'm glad you're doing this show, because I think we need more of that, you know, education, non-biased, man. You're not a fucking liberal. You're not a fucking conservative, man. You know, you're a regular
No.
human being, man, who doesn't pick sides. You don't have a team in this.
No.
You don't have a dog in this fight. And
Nope.
that's what it's all about. Well, guys, if you guys are good, I guess we'll go ahead and shut it down until next month.
Just remember, the owls are not what they seem.
Amen, brother.
There you go.
All right, well, guys,
Shout
until
out to
next-
Dale Cooper.
There you go.
Bill Cooper in the house, brother.
Oh no, Dale Cooper.
Dale,
Dale
oh, I thought you
Cooper.
said Bill. Oh,
Dale.
Dale.
Both
Yeah,
of
sorry,
you know
yeah,
what? Both of them.
But
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and put it for both. man.
Absolutely.
All right, well, guys, if y'all are done, then we'll go ahead and call it a day. All right, see you
right.
guys next month.
This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. The broadcasters of your area, in voluntary cooperation with the FCC and other authorities, have developed this system to keep you informed in the event of an emergency. If this had been an actual emergency, you would have been instructed where to tune in your area for news and official information. This concludes this test of the emergency broadcast system.